Okay, good evening, everyone. I'd like to call to order this Planning Committee meeting and welcome everyone to the Council chambers this evening. We're glad you're here. First item is additions and deletions, which we don't have any, so that's followed by declarations of pecuniary interest and nature thereof. I'll ask any member if they have any pecuniary interest that they would like to declare this evening. Seeing none, of course, you can declare one anytime if you need to. We have no minutes to adopt this evening, so that moves us on to public meetings, and there are 3 public meetings on the agenda this evening. To remind everybody who's with us this evening, the public meetings are for our information. The intention here is to hear from members of the public about any comments you may have with regard to any of these. No decisions will be made on any of these 3 files this evening. They'll return to council at a later date for a decision. The procedure for the public meetings will be that we will start with a report from the planner, followed by an opportunity then for members of the public, anybody who's interested in the application, to come forward and speak to us, making sure, of course, that you state your name for the record. And then finally, there'll be an opportunity for members of the committee to ask questions for clarification and to raise any issues that they would like the planner to consider as they prepare their recommendations. So, with that, we'll move into the first of our public meetings, and I will turn it over to the planner for the report.
All right, so this is a zoning bylaw amendment brought by Tom Schilling Law, and the agent on the file is Ron Davidson, and the address of the property is 154 South Rankin Street in Southampton. So we've got the Saugeen River kind of right here, and the Highway 21 bridge just over here, just to kind of orient everyone. So just to provide a little bit of site context, this is a residential residential site. The surrounding land uses are residential all around it, and there is also a commercial grocery store use just to the north of the property, right here. It is serviced with municipal water and sewer, and it is a corner lot, so there's access on both South Rankin Street and on Turner Street for this property. So the purpose of this application is to permit a temporary zoning bylaw on the severed land. So this is a lot that is proposed to be severed into 2 parcels. So there's the existing dwelling here, and then there's a small shed as well as a garage on the property. The applicant is looking to sever off the existing dwelling from the balance of the lands and build a new house on the severed lot. So the temporary zoning bylaw would permit this severance as without having to demolish these 2 structures. So basically, an accessory use, so a shop or a shed accessory to a residential use, is not permitted on a lot without having that principal use established. So by severing off the dwelling, that principal use is then gone from the property, and those dwellings or those structures would have to be demolished as a condition of consent for it to be allowed. So the temporary use proposed on the property would allow those 2 structures to stay there for a period of up to 3 years, and while the applicant is building a new dwelling on that property. So basically, just allows basically things to stay as they are. With the new lot lines being created around the existing dwelling. The other part of this zoning bylaw amendment would be to recognize a deficient rear yard setback. Now, due to the configuration of the proposed lot, this lot line would be considered the front yard, as it is the shorter of the 2 lot lines abutting the streets, even though the dwelling is oriented towards South Rankin Street. So the wording in the bylaw would define that as the front yard, which makes this the rear yard, even though it effectively acts as a side yard, and this effectively acts as the rear yard. Just the way it's worded in the bylaw, this is what becomes the front, as it's the shorter one. So the zoning bylaw would also recognize that reduced rear yard setback. So it would be reduced, from reduced from 7.5 to 5 meters. So that's still a 5-meter setback. So well beyond what a typical side yard setback would be, but not enough for a rear yard setback. So those are just the two sheds on the property. Just briefly in terms of the policies here, this is a residential area designation in the Saugeen Shores official plan, so there's no issue with the proposed use on either lot. It's just the continuation of those accessory uses on the property once the primary use has been severed from it. And the zoning is R1, and other than that, when discrepancy I noted, both lots meet all the provisions of the R1 zone. In terms of what we've already heard from our interdepartmental and agency consultation, the town of Saugeen Shores staff noted that they will seek 5% cash in lieu of parkland dedication on that severed parcel, which is quite standard for severances on vacant land for vacant lots. And they've also noted that the proposed lot is already serviced. So during infrastructure work, I believe in 2010, there was servicing brought into that severed lot. So it's already ready to go for the newly proposed dwelling. The SVCA did not recommend the preparation of an EIS in this case. They had no issues that they raised, and none of the other circulated agencies raised any issues either. We haven't received any public comments from the mail circulation that's been done at this point, but any that we receive tonight will be included in any future reports. So, in summary, this is a zoning bylaw amendment that's requested to permit a temporary use bylaw, so it's only in place for a period of up to 3 years, and it could be less than that if council should choose to make it less than that. For a lot without a principal structure, but to have those accessory buildings. So it would just be worded to permit 2 accessory buildings that exist to stay there for up to 3 years without having to be demolished. And the amendment would also address that reduced rear yard setback for the existing dwelling and the newly proposed lot line. And so this is just for information. We will provide a report regarding any information we received today and make a recommendation at that point.
Thank you, Tessa. So I'll ask, are there any members of the public who would like to speak to this application? Come on up and...
So good evening. My name is Ron Davidson. Excuse me. Your worship, members of council. I'm here tonight with Tom Schilling. He's the owner of the property, and his wife. Tom and his wife simply want to build a house on the property. They're going to do so in the spring. You can't build 2 houses on one lot, so they have to sever it. Problem is you can't have an accessory building first, as Tessa's just outlined, so they're in a kind of a catch-22 situation. So the short-term solution is to amend the zoning bylaw on a temporary use basis. As council, how is the town protected against the accessory building staying forever and Tom never taking out a building permit? Well, it's a 3-year temporary use zoning bylaw. He's also willing to sign an agreement. He's willing to post a security that if he doesn't knock the house, if he doesn't build a house within 3 years and the accessory use, the temporary use zoning bylaw lapses, he will knock down the accessory building, or municipality can go in with the securities they've collected and knock it down for him. He has no intentions of allowing that to happen. If you know the site, it's a very nice workshop. He's got a considerable amount of money invested in this, so that's why it's not one of those situations where you say, well, you knock down the building first, and then we'll give you a building permit or we'll give you a severance. So that's really not doable for him. Anyways, the municipality is protected, again, through an agreement and through this temporary use zoning bylaw. I think that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are there other members of the public who would like to speak to the application? Just ask one more time, are there any members of the public who would like to speak to the application? Okay, I don't see any, so I'll turn it over to members of the committee. Are there any questions of clarification or comments to this one? I don't see any, so thank you very much. And we will, as I said at the beginning, be receiving a report on this file at a later date with a recommendation. And I would say if there is anybody in the audience interested in hearing more about the application as it makes its way through the planning process, I'd encourage you to sign the registry outside of the room. Okay, so that moves us then on to item 5.2, and I'll turn it over again to the planner for the report.
Thank you. So this is another temporary zoning bylaw amendment, which is a bit unusual to have two in one meeting, but yeah, that's what we've got today. So again, it's to allow proposed use for up to a period of 3 years. That's how it's set out under the Planning Act. It allows that time frame. And again, this one is just for information today. So just to give some context, this is an application by Leader for 72 Bruce Road 25. So we've got Goderich Street right here, Bruce Road 25, and this is the subject property. Now, our mapping at the time that this was all of our mapping was done, this was one large property. I should note that just the buildings and kind of the area around the buildings have now been severed from the rest of the cultivated land. So when this application was first dropped off, that severance was conditional, but all of the conditions have been met. That new lot has been certified. So this lot now is only this kind of small area, which is what you see in the site plan in the report. It's really just that area, not the whole piece. So this is really the lot we're looking at. It's just this area with the buildings. It has residential uses and the use that was established that we'll be speaking to today, which is the school bus storage on the lot. The surrounding land uses are agricultural, so both the surrounding lands and the lands across the street are under cultivation. There's also institutional uses, the Unifor properties just over this way, as well as some commercial and low-density residential. It is serviced with municipal water and a private septic and has access to the county road. So the purpose of this zoning bylaw is to permit a temporary zoning bylaw on a portion of the subject property. So with temporary zoning bylaws, they don't have to apply to the entire lot. They could just apply to a portion of the property. So in this case, it's just this kind of hatched area that it would be looking to be applied to. That would permit the outdoor storage of buses for a period of up to 3 years. Now, the use exists on the property today. It was established on the property in contravention of the town zoning bylaw. The subject property is zone plan development. So basically, the plan development zoning is kind of a holding zoning, and the intent of that zone is to allow those lands to be developed comprehensively and efficiently over time. And so no new uses are generally no new uses are permitted to be established in a planned development zone. The idea is you go through a zoning bylaw process to figure out exactly how those lands will be developed. So in this case, this hashed area is where the buses are being stored and what's being asked to be allowed on a temporary basis. Now, just in terms of the policies, there's not too many issues here from a provincial policy standpoint. From the local official plan standpoint, this property is designated residential. And so the residential designation does not permit, it's stated in policy section 3.6.4.6. I'll just read it here. To help preserve the residential character and to maintain acceptable noise levels, the parking and storing of commercial vehicles should be prohibited in residential zoned areas. The zoning bylaw may establish maximum size restrictions for the parking and storage of vehicles. So notwithstanding the residential designation, the property is currently zone plan development. As I said, it doesn't have any residential zoning on it. And so the character of the subject lands and the adjacent lands is primarily agricultural and remains under active cultivation. Other adjacent land uses I've already mentioned, and so it is expected that this area will develop with medium density residential in the future, but that use hasn't been determined. So it's for this reason that it was determined that for this temporary use bylaw, it wouldn't necessarily require an official plan amendment in this case. So we accepted the temporary use bylaw application without requiring the official plan amendment because that residential use has yet to be established in the area, in the surrounding lands. Just in terms of... I'll just go back here for 1 second. Just in terms of the zoning, as I said, it is PD. School bus is a defined term in the zoning bylaw. As a vehicle for transporting persons to or from school is defined in the Highway Traffic Act. And school bus storage is defined as a lot or premises for the storages of school buses. It is not an established use in any zone in the zoning bylaw. There's nowhere in town that school bus storage is permitted under the zoning bylaw. Additional special provisions, in this case, may be required in a temporary use bylaw to allow storage of buses that do not meet the definition of school bus. So school buses are specifically those yellow buses under the Highway Traffic Act. Any of the white buses, those aren't school buses. So they are different, defined differently under the Highway Traffic Act. So if both are needing to be stored there, then they would both have to be addressed as they are defined differently. Again, if approved, the application would permit a temporary use bylaw up to 3 years. However, council could choose to limit the temporary use to a shorter time frame. That there's just a maximum established in the Planning Act. There's no minimum established in the Planning Act. In terms of interdepartmental consultation, the town of Saugeen Shores provided some comments on the history of their relationship with this property and the property owner, and noted that it had been established in contravention of the zoning bylaw, and it had been noted during a pre-consultation that this was not permitted approximately a year ago. They also noted that the lighting is in contravention to the town's property standards bylaw, and so noted that there may be an appearance of risk in ensuring compliance with town requirements, but did lay out some recommendations if council wished to approve it, in terms of some provisions in terms of site plan control and limiting the time of the temporary use permitted on the property. So those are included in the report. In terms of the other agencies, there are no real issues raised by any of the other agencies circulated. The SVCA didn't recommend an EIS, and Bruce County Transportation, who they have jurisdiction over the county roads, they didn't raise any concerns. Neither did any of the other agencies circulated. We did receive public comments from one individual, and then I received some more today, so those aren't included in the report or in the presentation, but they will be in any follow-up reports to committee and council. And so basically in those received on December 6th, there was a number of issues raised by the individual, including the unlawful nature of the use, the wording of the use in the notice, the precedents that this would set, the impacts on neighboring properties due to noise, emissions, lights, and traffic, and they compared this application to the Unifor parking lot application, which was recently refused by council. So I've included the full comments in the report, and in the follow-up report to council, I'll include a full kind of planning comment on those. But at this point, it's just included there for information. So again, this is a zoning bylaw amendment for a temporary use bylaw, which would permit school bus storage for a period of up to 3 years. And this is just to be received as information. And we'll come back after today with a report with all we've heard and a recommendation.
Thank you, Tessa. So I'll ask, are there any members of the public who wish to speak to this application?
Thank you, Mayor. My name's John Mann. I live in Saugeen Shores. I'm asking for council to dismiss this and deny the application, dismiss it summarily and immediately. What I didn't know was that there was a pre-consultation meeting 1 year ago with regard to this application. The applicant went to a pre-consultation meeting with the town, and the town told him that the school bus storage that he was proposing was unlawful. As a result, the applicant apparently did not file a application to amend the zoning. He went ahead and stored the school buses on his property in the summer. But then, other than storing the school buses, he started a commercial school bus business on his property, terminal business, where the school buses go in and out in the normal course of a school bus commercial enterprise business. And so in this year that he was told it's unlawful to do that, and rather than file an application right away, and it could have been resolved, that application could have been ruled upon certainly long before summer, when he actually stored buses. He had all the way from December last year to the summer to apply and have this council rule on. Can he amend the application or not? He did not do so. Instead, he decided, well, I'm going to do it anyway. I'm going to do this unlawful use and break the law. And then I'm not even going to apply until October 29, 2018. 10 months, more than 10 months after he was told it's unlawful to even do it. So here is the applicant breaking the law and then conducting a business, commercial business of school bus business since Labor Day and continuing right now, and not applying for his amendment till October 29. Stunning. As a citizen, I find this very troubling. What kind of precedent does this set? And I was told, hey, it's done all the time. Yikes. So, in other words, if you approve this, there's no penalty for breaking the law. He breaks the law every time that bus is stored there and every time it runs in and out. But on top of that, the application that he files in October 29, 2018 is misleading, to put it politely. The application asks for an amendment to the zoning bylaw, residential, to store school buses, store and park school buses. So let's assume you end up doing that. Well, he's operating this school bus business. They're leaving the property. They're not just stored there. They're leaving the property in the morning. They're coming back after taking the kids to school, and then they're going again and reversing the procedure at the close of school. So even if you approve it, he's breaking the law even if you approve storage. And the other very important thing on the notice is you send a notice out that he's applying to store school buses. Well, a neighbor or any citizen looks at that and says, well, storing school buses, it's not going to bother anybody. Nothing about any commercial business being done on the property. So nobody with this notice, the agencies and the public, no citizen knew that this bus business was being operated. unlawfully on this property. And then you have, in the same neighborhood, the same block virtually, the Unifor decision just last month, just not even 30 days. I think they still have time to appeal. If you allow this, what lawyer in the world would say he wouldn't appeal and say, look, we just asked for 8 spaces of parking, 8 spaces of parking, just cars. No dice. It wasn't some business we were asking for. And this council paid an expert planning group, Dorfman, for an expert opinion. And they said, there's no compelling reason to do this. And they were very critical of the application of Unifor to add 8 parking spaces. And you denied that Unifor application. Well, this is far, far more complicated. This is 20 huge school buses, and they're operating a commercial business out of it. And on top of that, I mean, this just keeps getting worse. Bruce Road 25, for decades, has had no bike lane, no sidewalk. It is one of the major routes for pedestrians and bikes from the trail system and to the beach. The main beach right at the foot of 25. So the danger that was brought up with the Unifor parking space just off Shipley, just as cars come in and out of Shipley, is compounded with a school bus, commercial school bus system running up and down. We've all driven that. And if you see a pedestrian or a bike, you got to get over in the other lane, or you're risking this person's life, frankly. So not only is that the liability factor of the no bike lanes, no sidewalk, one wonders, he's unlawfully doing it now. How is he getting insurance? And the town, in my view, is aiding and abetting this unlawful activity. The town has not done one thing to stop it. What kind of message is that sending out to citizens? Don't worry, if you want to amend something, just do it and then try to amend it. Because, it's probably been going on for a while. We might as well let it continue because there have been no problems. But you've had complaints from neighbors. Nothing. Bright lights. I don't know if I've seen them. These bright lights, unbelievable. And the noise and the beeping of the trucks going back, parking, the spinning light, pre-dawn darkness when school buses take off from this property. And these people are complaining about it, the quiet and peaceful enjoyment of their residential neighborhood. Nothing. And what kind of precedent does that set? And what's the purpose of a zoning law if you can just, ignore it and do whatever you want? Again, I get back to inclusion. If you include people in the neighborhood, if the applicant goes to the neighbors and say, is there some way we can work together and make this work? Maybe it would have worked. Maybe something could have been done. But an enforcement officer never went out to look. The town never did anything. The town allows it to continue. What's the purpose of this? You're just going to approve something he's been doing all along? That's why I say, and it's only storage. I emphasize that. It's not this operation of this school bus business. And the Unifor Dorfman precedent, that doesn't apply. I don't know what does. And if you approve it, Unifor will just go and say, we'll tag along on that decision. How come they're discriminating against us? I used to remember everything I should say, but I can't. I have these senior moments now, so I can't come up with them with everything I want to say. But I gotta say, I don't understand why this is still continuing. It's going to go into January now without anything being done. And then one other thing. I heard, well, the kids have to get to school. So are you telling me somebody's got to break the law to get these kids to school in the school bus? Give me a break. But the other thing is, you got this parking lot out here, unlimited parking, in my view. Have them park these school buses free of charge. Have the school buses free of charge as a public service. Park them next to the mall here on the side. There's plenty of parking here. And as I understand, they were parked across from the library before they went over here. So don't tell them, it's hard to believe that the municipality doesn't have some room to put these school buses free of charge, in my view, as a public service for all of us, so the kids can operate out of here. So, but if the only way to have them work is this place here on Road 25. So in all the circumstances, and particularly since they knew since last year, they could have had this application resolved one way or the other, and did nothing. The precedent is astounding. People should not be rewarded for breaking the law, in my view. There's no penalty if you approve it, and I ask that you summarily, immediately dismiss it, because every day it continues, and I think there's liability on the part of the town if something happens here. And one other point: if you go there, there's a speed limit sign and a stop sign and a porta-john. This thing was well thought out. There had to be regulations regarding it. They put those in because of some regulation said to do it. I'm positive of it. Somebody's insuring this thing, but I don't think you can insure an unlawful business. So I think there's a lot of problems regarding this. And in light of all that, ask for immediate dismissal of this and denial of the application. Thank you for your attention. I appreciate it.
Yep, thank you very much. Are there other members of the public who'd like to speak? Come on up and state your name.
My name's Dan Tiffin. I'm a resident on Bruce Road 25. I can say firsthand that the buses are disrupting in the morning and in the evening around the supper hour with the rumbling by. They actually shake my home. Some of them do. And on a safety issue, not all, but there are some of the bus drivers that tend to have quite a heavy foot. If nothing else, you could ask them perhaps to slow down before something like Mr. Mann was stating happens bad there. And that's what I was thinking too. Like if that's the precedent that's going to be set as far as running a business on the C8 or the Bruce Road 25, I've got some ideas that I could do with my place and make some money if I could go ahead and do that, and then apply, make my application after I'm up and running. That would be great. Anyway, I'd like to just agree with everything that Mr. Mann said. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Other comments from members of the public?
Sorry. Hi, my name's Janet Desjardins, and I live on County Road 25. And I was pretty surprised when I started hearing all this noise in the summertime, on the weekends, on Sunday. And I didn't know the bylaw at that time that I could have called to complain about the disrupt. My house was literally shaking when they were putting in that parking lot. I was so angry. And then I was wondering what on earth is going on. And then the next thing I know, I see a bus there. And then I see hydro buses there. And I'm like, when on earth did this come about? I had no notification, had no idea what was going on until after the fact. So I'm trying to figure out how it happened. When the buses were stored outside of town, in between Port Elgin and Southampton, which they should be, because I believe the buses are for Southampton School as well as Port Elgin School. So why would that not be a perfect spot in between the two towns? I was just flabbergasted why you guys moved it. I had no idea why it was even there. And I'm mad because my bedroom's facing the road. And every morning, 6 o'clock in the morning now, like hydro traffic's just is bad enough. And now I got the bloody buses back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. It's ridiculous. I'm like, what's next? What are you going to do next? Like they were talking about, what business is going to pop up next? Like, I'm getting a little tired of it. It's ridiculous. And I want to address that Highway 20, right? My Highway 25 is what I call it, and it's ridiculous in the winter. I'm up to here. I'm up to here with the traffic is ridiculous. I don't understand why hydro traffic has to go the shore road. What's wrong with Highway 21? Like, I could never understand why people can't use the proper road, the Highway 21, not Highway 25. So, I guess that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Further comments from members of the public? Ask one more time if any other member of the public wants to make any comments. Seeing none, then I guess we'll ask members of the committee if they have comments that they would like to make at this time or questions for clarification. We'll start with Councillor Grace.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have two questions, and I guess they would be both for the county planners. Tessa, for your report, one of the comments you made was, because of the experience, there may be an appearance of risk in ensuring compliance with town requirements. Am I correct in interpreting this as you're basically saying we'd be setting a precedent whereby others would feel they could ignore town requirements without repercussions?
Those are Town of Saugeen Shore staff comments.
Oh, okay. Then I will ask Mr. Posner, please. Thanks, Tessa.
Yeah, so this is that particular comment from us is because we are unsure of working with the landowner if there'll be continued or non-compliance with our bylaws. Not because of its potential precedent-setting nature, but in other words, if the applicant chose to do something unlawful again, would he continue to do so until we reacted, rather than the proactively asking us?
Thank you.
Okay. Try to be sensitive to that.
So I have one other question, and I'm not sure who this would be directed to, but Mr. Mann, in Mr. Mann's delegation, he pointed out the distinction that the application is only used for the purpose of storage, but he went on to make the point that, in fact, it's more than storage. It's an operation of a business. So if this application was approved, would it be simply for storage, or would it could it be broader to allow the to permit the use, in the practical use, which is actually happening?
So we had some discussion about this because there's school bus storage defined in the bylaw, and then there's also transportation terminals, which are defined differently, and those would include a variety. In the definition in the bylaw, it includes a variety of other uses, including dropping patrons off and selling tickets and that sort of thing. And that didn't really seem to fit with us. And as it's not in school bus storage as opposed to open storage, which is kind of a similar use, right? When you have just, products being stored outside, like what you would have at Home Depot, for example. school bus storage, our position was that the definition of school bus storage, we would assume that to mean that buses would be going in and out at the school day. They're stored there when they're not in use. And so that was the assumption we were working on with that definition, the bylaw, and that seemed to fit what's happening there. So with any even, if you have a storage business for, storage lockers, there's going in and out, things are never just left anywhere. So we've still felt that the school bus storage definition in the zoning bylaw did meet that, but council could choose to look at defining it differently in any zoning change that they brought here. But that was kind of the thought process behind keeping it as that use is defined already in the bylaw.
Vice Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to the planner, Tess and Dan, when the recommendation comes forth, and we don't know what the recommendation is going to be yet, obviously, do planners take into consideration what future uses of the property to the north and the east could potentially be?
Yes, yeah, it's certainly a consideration.
That's taken into consideration. The other question I had was, with the, I see in the staff comments, the temporary zoning bylaw be allowed for 1 year, annually, and then in your comments from the Bruce County planners, you talk about, up to 3 years could be granted, but when the recommendation comes forth, it could be less. I think was that the comment, and that was the first part A of the question. Part B was, where does the 3 years come from?
So the 3 years is in the Planning Act. So Section 39, which gives the power to create temporary use bylaws, says that they may be permitted for a period up to 3 years, and then you can apply for extensions of up to 3 years beyond that. So, they can be longer than that, but they would have to come back and apply. But there's no minimum set out in the Planning Act, so council could choose to set any time between, 1 day, which would probably not be practical, and 3 years.
Gotcha.
But, yeah, that's defined in the Planning Act.
Okay. And my last question, if I might, from our planning coordinator, Jay, condition of approval for reconsideration are comments. Evidence provided for a permanent location by the end of the bylaw. Does that question mean for a permanent location where, or could the permanent location be at that site? I'm not sure what you mean by that.
I didn't have the paper in front of me, but it could be application for permanent location at this spot, provided the justification was provided and could be reviewed and analyzed in the normal way. There, it could be anywhere in town.
Okay. Thank you.
I'm going to get Councillor Rich, and then I'm going to come to Councillor Mayette.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. My question is to Tessa. So just kind of a little follow-up on what Vice Deputy Mayor Mott was saying. So that surrounding area is currently zoned R1, is that what you said, or is it agriculture?
So it's designated residential in the official plan, but that whole area is zoned planned development.
Planned development, but the idea being that it's going to be housing, right?
That's what the OP designation says, which generally indicates kind of the future,
right?
What the intended use will be. So yeah.
So that would be kind of a business running like that might not really be in keeping with the flavor of that neighborhood. I know that Lake Range services up there, and then the CAW, which is like a conference center, but I don't know. From my perspective, it doesn't feel like it really sort of fits in with the flavor of where that neighborhood would go. The next question I have is with regard to timelines. So also a follow-up, Vice Deputy Mayor. So with that temporary permit, when would you think you would be bringing back a final report or recommendation?
Typically, typically it's the next meeting. So unless we're informed by town staff or the applicant that they're either withdrawing or town staff asking us to delay for some reason, those are really the only times that we would ever not bring it at the next one, is if someone told us there was a good reason for us not to. So my expectation is still that it will come for recommendation at the next planning meeting.
So I don't think anybody wants to restrict anyone's ability to run a business. So we could say that at the end of the year, for example, at the end of the school year, perhaps in June, that they could continue to run that business to then as temporary zoning, and then stop them at that time and have them find a new location over the summer.
You'd have to set a date in the temporary use bylaw. So the way they're worded is you'd have the bylaw number, and then it would be 2018, 0601. So you'd have to kind of establish that date that then the use reverts. But yes, you can. There's no minimum time, so it can be 1 year, it can be 6 months. There's no minimum in the Planning Act.
Excellent. Thank you for your time.
Councillor Mayette.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and once again through you. My question is for the building department, or specifically, I guess, Mr. Pausner. In this regards to enforcement of our bylaws, we have bylaws in the town, or a number of bylaws. If I walk my dog on the beach in the summertime, I'm subject to a fine. If I park my car in a non-parking zone, I'm subject to a penalty for that. If earlier today we heard at 154 South Rankin Street, if Mr. Shillinglaw doesn't build a house on his property within 3 years, we're going to hire somebody to tear down his shed and send him a bill for it. In this case, we've got blatant and obvious contradiction of the zoning bylaws, and we have a business per student, presumably operating with a business license in our town, who are in conjunction contravening our bylaws. So what tools do we have at our disposal for enforcing our bylaws? Are there no penalties applicable in situations such as this?
I'm not in enforcement staff, nor am I in the building department, but I can certainly, we can provide answers to council and sort of a general description of what the enforcement options are when this comes back, so that you're aware. I don't want to risk getting the wrong answer.
So, yeah, enforcement enforcement of the bylaws isn't a matter under the Planning Act, so it's a little different from what we're talking about here. Now, what I would say is that, while cumbersome, this is the process. We have somebody's taken an action on a property that is in contravention of the zoning bylaw. This is what happens. Our bylaw enforcement officers go out, there's a conversation, it makes its way into the planning process, and makes its way through to a decision. It's not the way we like to see the process undertaken. We always want members of the public, property owners, to go through the process before taking those steps on their properties, to do something that's anything really that would require a zoning change or an official plan change. But this is what we do. We go through this process. Council makes a decision. So that's how I would answer it.
Is it within our legal ability to amend our bylaws so that there are applicable fines when somebody blatantly goes against the recommendations and the direction of the town and does in this case, what would appear to be the exact opposite?
I can't speak to that. I'm not sure what our powers are in that regard, but I would say that, on the whole, this is an effective process. It takes a little bit of time, but I think it's the right way to deal with this, rather than being punitive necessarily. We go through a process, we come up with an answer, and we decide one way or the other whether the application is acceptable according to our official plan and zoning bylaw. And generally, without regard to whether it's in place or not, the question is it good planning or not? And so I think that, like I say, is the process perfect? No, but it is the process, and it does ultimately sort itself out.
And I accept that as answer for the planning process. What about the company that is operating the business? When they submit a business plan and apply for a business license, do they not have to specify where they're going to be operating that business and what their facilities are and so on and so forth?
I would say that those are fine questions to ask, but not as part of this process. The Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you, 2 questions for Tess. When the buses were stored north of town previously, what was the land designation where they were stored there?
I haven't looked into that property, but I did do a search of the zoning bylaw, and school bus storage didn't come up as a permitted use in the zoning bylaw. When I did a search, I can double check that.
It wasn't a permitted use?
No, so I don't know if I'd have to double check that exact property to see if there is anything specific in place there. But yeah, I'm not sure. I can get that information in the next report.
That'd be great. And one last question, and you probably won't have this either, but you probably have to look it up. What was the term used to describe the placement of the buses at this location at that time? That's something you have to look as well. Like what was it called? Was it storage at that time, or was it a business location designation? Because this is the third. This will be the third move of First Student. They were on just off of Goddard Street at Barnes. Then they moved out here. Now they've moved on to the 25. So I'm just wondering what the designation north of the town was.
Yep.
Thank you very much.
Further questions for clarification from members of the committee? That was a question, a similar question that I had. Both of those, we in fact have had 2, like you say, like the Deputy Mayor just said, we've had 2, First Student has moved 2 times, and both, I was just looking on Bruce County maps, and both of those properties were zoned highway commercial. The later one, HC 25, I haven't had a chance to look up what the 25 means, but there's obviously some special provisions there. The one is just straight highway commercial. It was interesting, your comment at the beginning that we don't have places at all zoned within the municipality for buses, though we have had bus storage for a very long time. So that's an interesting issue to clarify. It's important not just for this application, though it does obviously pertain to this application, but in general, we do need to have bus storage somewhere in the municipality. If there is no zoning that permits that, that becomes an issue, since we will have to have it somewhere. Anyway, that's it would be interesting to get some more details on that. Okay, I think all my issues have been addressed. So, if there's nothing further from the committee, then we will hear back from the planner on this application by the sounds of things at our next meeting. But I would advise all members of the public, if you are interested in being informed of future steps in the planning process with regard to this application, make sure to sign the registry outside the room so that we have your contact information and we'll be able to communicate with you. So we'll move on then to our third and final public meeting for the evening, and I will turn it over to the planner for the report.
Thank you. Good evening. So this is a concurrent official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment application to bring the town's planning policies into conformity with the Saugeen, Grey Sauble, North Bruce Peninsula South Protection Plan, which I'll just be calling the South Protection or Source Protection Plan from here on out, and it was approved in 2016. So under the Clean Water Act, municipalities have 5 years to bring their planning documents into conformity with the Area Source Protection Plan. So that's what this amendment is about. This is a fairly straightforward amendment given the primary source of municipal drinking water is from the Southampton intake. So I grabbed a picture here. This is at the end of Peel Street, looking out onto the lake, and the intake pipe stretches out 2 kilometers into the lake, and that provides drinking water for Southampton and Port Elgin. So the primary focus again of this amendment is dealing with protecting that water source from contaminants. the source protection plan is applicable regardless of whether or not the amendment is in the official plan or not. Those policies are applicable, but it does require us to, as I mentioned, update our policies to do a couple things. First, indicate mapping that identifies vulnerable areas, and two, provide text that identifies policies within the source protection plan. And those policies can, broadly speaking, be broken into two categories: policy actions and policy references. So I'll just go over that throughout the remainder of this presentation here. So this is a mapping schedule proposed for the official plan, and this is a reference policy. As I mentioned, there's no policy actions associated with it. So we're essentially showing the intake protection zone here. There's no policies that say within this zone or within this designation you shall. It's simply referencing the map. So you can see the sort of two bubbles there are sort of concentrated around the intake pipe, and then there's a broader area that stretches into the lake and onto land. So that's called the intake protection zone. This is a second map proposed to be included in the official plan, and there's a very similar map or an identical map in the zoning bylaw that's proposed through an amendment. And this is the events-based area. So there's two categories within the events-based area. There's the green, which is 13,000, so events-based 13,000. And the primary concern with vulnerability within the intake protection zone for the Southampton intake is fuel storage. So what this policy is saying, if you're in the events-based area 13,000 and you have a fuel storage tank of a capacity that is greater than 13,000, the policy says it shall go to the risk management official, and they're located in Grey Sauble, and then they review it against the source protection plan. And from what I understand, the primary action that would be required would be a risk management plan to be developed with the risk management official and the applicant. And similar policy action is required for the areas in purple. Only for those areas, it's a fuel storage facility of greater than 22,500 liters. And just to give you some context, I Googled this earlier. A typical gas station would have a tank between 40 and 90,000 liters. So any sort of gas station proposal in these areas would be subject to the policies of the source protection plan. And this is a third schedule. So these are for lands outside of the settlement area. And this map identifies the hatching is highly vulnerable aquifers, and the green areas are significant groundwater recharge areas. Again, that's a policy reference. There's no actionable policy requirement stemming from the proposed policies in this. It is indicated in the policies that we shall have regard to groundwater quality when determining when reviewing applications. So we worked on this proposal primarily with the Source Protection Office in Grey Sauble, and also through the one window review process through the Ministry of Municipal Affairs. The lead agency was the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks. So we more or less adopted their text modifications in the final version of the proposed amendment. And there was no real issues raised by any of the other agencies. No public comments were received for this application. In discussing that with the Grey Sauble Conservation Authority, I understand that's fairly typical with source water amendments, We did advertise in the Saugeen Times online and the Shoreline Beacon. We had a quarter-page ad in there as per the requirements of the Planning Act. But nonetheless, there was no comments received on this. So, yeah, just to recap, this proposed amendment brings would bring the official plan and zoning bylaw into conformity with the applicable source protection plan. The recommendation is that it be received for information at this time and come back for a further recommendation at a later date.
Thank you very much. So I'll ask, are there members of the public who wish to speak to this planning application? Nobody's jumping right up, but I'll ask one more time. Is there any members of the public wishing to speak to this application? Seeing none, so we'll move to members of the committee and ask if committee members have comments. Councillor Grace.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is something that was raised in our earlier session, but I wanted to ask Daniel. I understand that your advertisement of the proposed amendment was abided by the requirements of the Planning Act with the advertisement using those two media sources. I wondered, I don't have anything, I don't think I've got a question about the proposed amendment, but I think this is a really important issue that should be more broadly distributed to the public. And while there are a lot of readers of those two, of the Shoreline Beacon and the Saugeen Times, I wonder if you would contemplate adding the town's email service, automated email service, as another way for you to advertise. I think that would be effective, and especially since we have a lot of seasonal residents in our town, that would be a broader application. And I don't think it would take too much effort. It wouldn't cost you anything, I don't think. So that would be one request I would have. I have two more questions, if that's okay. One of the comments is talking about the fact that the province recommends that the municipality consider policies to address the creation of transport pathways to manage risks posed by spills in storm sewers, ditches, etc. Daniel, maybe you can't answer that, but I wonder, is this something that our municipality is going to be working on? Perhaps the Director of Infrastructure or Jay could answer that.
We act on the advice of our risk management officials through the Grey Sauble, and they're not recommending any action on those recommendations at this time. The plan has a series of required actions, which is what we're undertaking as part of what we're already doing. They have some recommendations which we can get to, but as of right now, we haven't got a recommendation from our advisors to proceed right now.
Okay, thank you. And then the last question is about the fuel facility limits. With Daniel's comment that a gas station would typically hold between 40 and 90,000 liters, does that mean that this would exclude any new gas stations from being built in the areas that are the purple and green areas of our town?
Yeah, no, I should clarify. One, that 40 and 90,000 is based on a Google search, so I don't know how accurate it is, but I think it's safe to say that most gas stations would be captured by that policy, but it doesn't preclude them from being in there. The main policy action or trigger is that the application would have to be screened by the risk management official at the Grey Sauble Conservation Authority. And the action that would come out of that would be the production of a risk management plan. So I just sort of broadly captured what would be in a risk management plan. There would be a requirement for an annual inspection, requirements for record keeping and documentation, provisions for the proper disposal of unused fuels, and requirements for containment measures. So that would be something that they would work on through their application process, but it doesn't preclude those facilities from being within those events-based areas.
Further comments? Vice Deputy Mayor? Comment?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question was around the risk management plans, and I'm just wondering, we do have a storage facility at Port Elgin Harbor, and my question, I guess, is through you, Jay. Do we have, the municipality then, we have our own risk management plan for the harbor? If not, are we developing one? That's the first part of the question. And the existing facilities, I'm talking about Circle K, Dunlop Fuels, would they understandably have their own risk management plans in place? If not, is this part of the amendment where those businesses that are currently in existence would be required to have risk management plans? I don't know what exists out there right now.
So the first part, there's three parts I heard. First part is we have our own plan for our harbor facility. It was approved by our risk management office a year ago. And the other companies that you named, they are on we provided a list to our risk management office for those facilities to develop risk management plans. And we had a 3-year window where they would work with those landowners over, progressively over 3 years to develop plans. So haven't got off the top at the tip of my tongue which ones have or don't have, but they're all actively preparing for sure.
Good, thank you.
And then the third element does not affect this part does not affect past fuel storage facilities. The other parts of the source water protection plan already required us to do those or to have those facilities planned for. This is to capture future developments.
Councillor Schreider.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. I guess maybe even a follow-up or 2 cents on the last comment made as well, is that TSSA regulations might also dictate a lot of what was included in there as well. So we might already be doing them through our risk management plan. I can't speak 100%, but I think TSSA would cover a lot of those. My question is, through the agencies that you consult with, Dan, there was 4 that didn't provide a response. So Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, the Métis Nation, Blue Water District School Board, and Bruce Grey Catholic District School Board. What is that process for consultation from these agencies, and is there another follow-up to ensure that we've captured their concerns? Thank you.
So typically when we receive an application, we'll go through a sort of internal review, make sure it's a complete application. And then we'll send it, request comments to the various agencies, and that's through an email request. I would say it's fairly typical that we don't hear back from a number of agencies, and it may be for a number of reasons. They don't have an interest. I can't speak to why they don't reply, but suffice it to say they probably deal with a fair number of applications on a weekly basis, so they're probably reviewing them, and if we think there's an interest there that perhaps they missed, we will follow up, but that's typically not the case with most applications that we don't receive comments on.
Anything further? I would just a couple of comments. I guess I think it's very important that we don't overstate the significance of this. These maps were developed as a result of a 10-year process. Throughout that entire 10-year process, they did not identify a single threat. Only after the process did they figure one out, fuel storage, which they jammed through with an amendment. I was there. And then, so there are no threats. I really think, frankly, there's that threat, I guess. But I think we should find a way in these amendments to be very upfront in the plan that there's only one threat, fuel storage. That's it. Because we don't want to have a situation where people look at these maps and think, geez, this is a source water protection zone. I can't do anything in here. There's a risk. There are no risks. There's 13,000 liters of fuel, 26,000 liters of fuel. You have to have a risk management plan. already, quite frankly, and perfectly redundant plans, frankly, because the ESA already covered it. So, I mean, I think we really need to put this in context and not overreact here or say that this is very significant. It's not very significant. I'm troubled, frankly, by the ministries writing in their report this business about transportation corridors. That was never identified as a threat by the committee, ever. It's not in the plan. But for some reason, the ministry is inventing risks. I think it's a prime example, frankly, of regulation creep. They would love to push this into more and more areas. Frankly, there's on the map that you put up, page 3. Would you put that on the screen? Talk about regulation creep. Look at this map. If you go to look at the extent of the event-based area. The event-based area is just barely to the east of Carlisle Street on that map. But yet, if you drive down County Road 3, you'll find a sign that says you're entering a source protection zone way up at the Doll Side Road. 2 side roads to the east. There's no source protection zone at the Doll Side Road. It's 2 concessions away. They would just love to push this and push it out. And I think we need to be very clear. Frankly, we should pull that sign out and move it down to Carlisle Street where the actual zone is. Because we even had an application in here not very long ago, as I recall, where somebody identified that sign and were afraid about, and the neighborhood was concerned about a development in that area up at the Doll Side Road because it's a source protection zone. And it isn't. It's confusing. It confuses the public. It confuses the planning process. It's not good. It's bad. So I think we should be very clear. We'll get this to go forward. I would take your time. We have till 2021. So get the wording right. I maybe even wait till the next OP review. The OP review is coming up anyway. So you can work it through before 2021 anyway. And really clarify this wording so that we can clarify to the public that there's very, very limited risk here. The risk is limited to fuel storage alone and only over 13,000 liters. And just narrow this right down to what it is and don't let it creep any farther. I apologize for my rant, but this thing drives me nuts. Anyway, so if there's nothing further on that, then we will await the report of the planner whenever that comes. And if anybody ever of the public is interested in continuing to hear information on this report going forward, please sign the registry outside in the hall, and we'll certainly keep you up to date. So that moves us on to item 6. 6.2.1. This is reports. We're now moved out of public meetings and into planning reports. And so the first one is Butner Sousa, and we'll turn it over to the planner for the report.
Great, thank you. So this is, as mentioned, a report coming forward for recommendation. This had previously gone to public meeting in November. And so I apologize for those members of council who weren't here in November and this is the first time they're seeing it, but I think the report is still pretty comprehensive in terms of what's being requested here. So just to situate everybody again, this is a proposal to develop a 6-plex along Catherine Street. So it's right here between Bricker and Godrich. So we're right in the commercial core area of Port Elgin. So there's 2 properties involved. So we've got the Butner property on Catherine and the Sousa property on Bricker, and each of those lots is proposed to be severed. A portion of it, each of those pieces, be recombined to form a new lot on which 6-plex is proposed to be built. The surrounding land uses include commercial, residential, and institutional. It is fully serviced on municipal services and has access on Catherine Street as well as the municipal lane to the rear. So I apologize for the quality of the site plan on the slide. It's a little bit tough to see, but this is the proposed 6-plex here. This is the existing dwelling at 617 Catherine Street. And so parking is proposed to be at the rear of the building. There'll be 2 spaces provided on the newly proposed lot, and then 8 spaces provided at the rear of the existing dwelling, and then the existing parking at Catherine Street will remain there. So this is an application to rezone from core commercial to core commercial special. The official plan does permit high density residential uses in the core commercial, but the zoning bylaw does not allow for residential uses where there isn't a commercial use. So basically, that's why we need the special zoning provision to allow the sixplex without any commercial units. But it's fine and it's contemplated in the official plan. So this that is what we would have here. The proposed amendment would also recognize the deficient lot size and rear yard setback for the property at Sousa's property on Bricker Street as a result of this proposal. So this property here, once the rear is severed, will be slightly too small to meet the CC zoning, and the rear yard will also be slightly too small to read the CC zoning, but it'll generally be about what we would expect for a residential lot. So that retained piece will be about 494 square meters. R1 zoning requires 500, so very close. The CC zone requires 10 meters of rear yard, probably for loading and stuff. You can imagine in the rear of a commercial area, you want to have room for loading and garbage and various things. In a residential area, it's only 7.5, and this is about that same distance. So it would still be appropriate for the residential use that is remaining on that property. So this is just to show the site plan for the severances. So these are the two pieces that are proposed to be recombined. So this section would be rezoned CC7 to allow that proposed sixplex, and then the property on Bricker Street would be rezoned CC8 to recognize its lot size and rear yard. So this is kind of that's the existing house on Catherine Street. This is kind of the area that the building is proposed to be. So I've gone through the policies, I think, generally in the previous meeting and in the report. I will just speak briefly to parking since that was brought up at the last meeting. I've kind of broken it down in the report. So this existing dwelling requires 4 parking spaces per the bylaw. The new proposed building will require 8 parking spaces, so 1 for each of the 6 proposed dwellings, and then 2 visitor parking spaces. So the total requirement parking for this lot and this lot is 12 spaces, and so some of it is proposed to be located on this lot for the new dwelling, 8 spaces there. And that's permitted in the zoning bylaw. If you can't accommodate all of your parking on your property, you can have it located on an adjacent lot within 150 meters in the same zone. So that's an acceptable solution that's laid out in the bylaw for just this type of situation. So overall, there will be 13 spaces provided on these 2 lots. And so there's no concern with that. They could even get rid of one and they would still meet the zoning bylaw. There were also some comments raised in regards to access to the lane. So there were no concerns raised by the fire service when the agencies were circulated, because there is the fire hall just kind of up the road here. And there was some discussion about maybe forcing these those in this parking lot to have to turn out towards Bricker when leaving, so it would be forcing them out this way. Now, currently, this is a 2-lane. Lane, and other users, like for example those that park beside Keepsakes and Memories just down the other lane, they're not also forced to go one way. They can come in and out wherever. So if the town decides they want to make that lane one-way traffic, I think that makes sense, but I don't think it makes sense to ask of it of just these users of that lane and not other users of that lane. So it could definitely be contemplated. That might impact the fire trucks, and they might not have to adhere to that potentially. But yeah, that was my concern with forcing these users to turn out one way and go towards Bricker and then around instead of having the choice to go left and right. I think we should be consistent with everyone along that lane, and if that's the preferred option, then the town could look at making that one way. So I think those are the two major issues that were raised in the previous meeting. With that, I do recommend these comments were also provided then. They haven't changed. Address that. So with that, I do recommend approval. This proposal meets the policies of the official plan. It will add needed residential rental units in the downtown core and is compliant with the general intent of the bylaw. So I do recommend that the proposed bylaw be forwarded to council for approval.
Thank you. I have a recommendation. I'll read it, and then we can take any comments from the committee. That the zoning bylaw amendment number Z47-18.46 for the properties described as Block 16, Lot 8S, Part Lot 7, and Part Lot 6, Plan 78, Town of Saugeen Shores be approved, and the necessary bylaw forwarded to council for adoption. Questions or comments from the committee? Councillor Schreider.
Just through you, Mr. Mayor, just maybe a clarification. So one of the Rankin Street property that was being severed or for consideration in the public meeting session, there was a 5% in lieu cash donation. This one does not have that mentioned. What's the difference between there? Maybe it's just clarification for my part. Whoever, maybe it's Jay. Sorry, thank you.
It's simply that we haven't processed those applications yet for severance, nor have we dealt with the site plan, the other two opportunities.
Anything further? Seeing nothing, all in favor? Carried. So that moves us on then to our next report, which is staff report on site plan agreement 767091 Ontario Limited. Who has the report? Jay has the report. Yeah, we're making our way quick. Over to you.
First one is a request from Square Deal Neals to build a new retail and warehouse outlet just south of their existing site. It's proposed to be about 8,000 square feet, and we've worked with this developer over the past year to develop a plan to get through the planning process, as well as to get to the site plan process. And we're very pleased with what's been proposed and what we've brought forward for approval. And guess I'll leave it right there.
I'll read the recommendation, and then we can take questions or comments. That council pass a bylaw to authorize a site plan agreement with 767091 Ontario Limited, and that council authorize the Director, Infrastructure and Development Services to approve subsequent revisions to the site plan associated with the subject lands, provided the revisions are in general conformity with the overall site plan, the town's design guidelines, and compliant with the town's zoning bylaw. Questions or comments from the committee? The Vice Deputy Mayor.
Mr. Mayor, Jay, I'm just wondering, you take a look at the nice work that's happening in the south end of Port Algon with our landscape plan and the corridor coming into the community. And I spoke at the November meeting when it was a public meeting, I believe, talking about this is another good opportunity for land that's being developed to address the corridor, the entranceway into Southampton from a landscaping perspective. And, and there was very little at that time back in November, and I see it's been stepped up a little bit on page 4, I think, or 3 of the report, the site plan. How is it determined, who made that, who makes that final decision in terms of the landscape plan? How was it determined, what was put into that plan? That's the first part. I read in the report, you talk about the developer proposes cedars. But then in the site plan, it talks about, grasses and some other plantations. I'm a little confused with, I think the landscape plan would be accurate with the grasses, and I see no mention in the site plan of cedars. You've mentioned it in your report. But how's the determination made, what's happening along that corridor for this particular site. I'm still not convinced we went far enough with our landscape plan, that's all, but
Okay.
how was that decided?
So the two parts are this. The first is the developer always proposes. We are not designers ourselves. We communicate in the consultation process with the landowner and their consultants the guidelines and provide the direction that they should complement and be consistent with surrounding landscaping, as well as addressing the other items that are in our bylaw and our guidelines. So in this, I would like to think it compares favorably, in particular, to Bruce County Chiropractic for two reasons. One is the same designer, and number two is that without looking at the potential impacts that site had versus this one, they did address the sort of the consistency and the complemented, or whatever the word is, nature of the proposal. So in this case, my report mentions cedars, but it goes without saying that there are other things in there like ornamental grasses. And I cropped the site plan image that shows the cedars being listed as a species under there. It's just not noted on the drawing. It's got its own, the symbol is shown in the legend to be cedars. In this case, it's not just that it's cedars, it's not just that it's ornamental grass, it's not just that there's these pockets throughout the site. It's managing the site in its role as a buffer between that and the residential to the east. So we worked with the developer to ensure they didn't just clear cut the whole buffer. That's an important element of our guidelines. We worked with the developer as much as we could to preserve the trees at the corner of Peel and the highway. And as much as some people might think they might be a visibility hazard, we think the way they've been trimmed and the way they're set back, they can be retained and can survive. The trick will be during construction, will they continue to survive? And we're not so sure. But even saying that, the rest of the landscaping plan that's proposed still has to accommodate parking, snow storage, movement of water through the site. And so if it's a bit of a black art or black magic, this distills to that. And I still think it compares well to Bruce County Chiropractic.
Any further comments from the committee? I don't see any. It's just great to see a business like Square Deal Neal's making an expansion like this, and a nice. I think it's going to be a nice improvement to that particular lot to see this new facility on it. So I'm happy to see it. So with that, we have I've read the recommendation, so I guess I'll ask all in favor. Carried. Okay, and that moves us on. Bear with me. To 6.2.3, staff report on site plan agreement with Skyline Real Estate's Holdings. Jay.
And this one, I just want to highlight that this development has been going so well that we never expected Skyline or the Reed's Heritage Group to actually change this development, but they did. They think the rental market is hot enough that they can accommodate 8 more units. And so we were happy and pleased when they presented this as a change to their development. And I think the drawings from the approved to the proposed for both the building and the landscaping show how well it fits in with the already approved drawings. It's sort of a shame that this isn't something that can be dealt with more quickly, but that's the system we had, and so we're asking for the further approval for any further revisions to be delegated to staff.
Okay, I'll read the recommendation, then we can take any questions. Excuse me. That council pass a bylaw to authorize a site plan agreement with Skyline Real Estate Holdings Incorporated, and that council authorize the Director, Infrastructure and Development Services to approve subsequent revisions to the site plan associated with the subject lands, provided the revisions are in general conformity with the overall site plan, the town's design guidelines, and compliant with the town's zoning bylaw. Questions or comments from the committee? The Vice Deputy Mayor.
To you, to Jay. Jay, this is a wonderful story for our community. Again, adding more renter units into our inventory. It's a great thing, and I know the first building that went up, I believe they're in the $1,200 to $1,600 range. My question to you, Jay, is when you're meeting with developers of this nature, are there discussions being held in terms of providing more affordable housing units, rental units, for members of the public that can't afford that? I'm guessing a little bit here at the $1,200 to $1,600 range. I understand they're in that range, perhaps. But Are there discussions happening at the staff level when developers are looking at constructing units where maybe a percentage, whether it be 2%, 5%, 5 units, 10 units, where they're constructed, try to keeping in mind that there are people out there that are hurting from a rental perspective that maybe can't afford that high price. So are there discussions taking place in terms of providing more affordable apartment units?
Yeah, so in general, yeah. I don't want to speak to any particular discussions we're having with this developer because I don't want to judge their outcome, but we do speak with all our developers about providing affordable options for all, and we speak about them for rental options, for ownership options, for housing that's integrated and mixed so that they're not all in one location, but rather they're mixed throughout the community, and so that economic disparity, or rather that economic diversity, is not a ghettoization of that diversity. And so we have those discussions, and we've been, at least so far, pleased with what we've heard from the developers. We've had landowners meet with us independently, and I say not to stress that it's not necessarily this project, but we've had landowners meet with us to speak about what they can do and what options might be something that would work in our community.
I think that's great that those discussions are happening, and there is a need for that out of the range of rental. So thank you, Jay, for that.
Further questions or comments from the committee? Being none, I've asked a question. All in favor? That's carried. All right, and that moves us on then, I think, to... Nope, just to adjournment. So we'll take a motion to adjourn. Move with the Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councillor Rich. All in favor? We are adjourned. Thank you all very much. Have a good night.